So hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to wait a few moments to let people in, and yeah, we're just going to keep chatting Fikayo, right, until that that has happened, basically. But yeah. we don't have a huge amount of time. That's always that's the good thing and the bad thing about these food for thought webinars. It somehow seems that 30 minutes actually is a great time because it never gets boring in 30 minutes, but they also go by so fast. So I can never ask all my questions, which is really annoying.
Well, as a storyteller, my personal philosophy is always to leave the audience wanting more than leave them feeling like they've had enough. So I think it works.
Exactly. See there we go. That's the perfect rationalization for this. So hello everyone, welcome to Food for Thought. Thank you for joining us again this week, and we have a lot of our entrepreneurial food for thought, which are of course the ones that I really enjoy. So I'm going to be your host today. My name is Caroline Wiels. I'm a professor of marketing at the Business School, as well as the Associate Dean for Entrepreneurship. And it is in this capacity that I have met our guest today, who is Fikayo, who has started a really cool company that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about his journey today. So welcome, Fikayo, to Food for Thought. Thank you so much for taking time. As usual, let me give you a brief overview of what's happening in the next few weeks, because we still have webinars scheduled until December. So next week we have a interesting conversation about Brexit, because that is still happening. I know that we aren't talking about it anymore, but that is still going on. So we kind of thought it was a good time to revisit what the state of play is, as well as the impact this is going to have on business. Then we have a webinar about leadership. One of our visiting professors, who's Stefan Stern, is going to talk about how to be a better leader. And then on the 2nd of December, my co-associate dean for entrepreneurship actually is going to make a guest appearance, Kostas, with one of his contacts, who is a very successful entrepreneur as well as turned venture capitalist. So this is what we have coming up in the next few weeks, and I hope that you can join us as usual. But let's go back to Fikayo, and I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can actually properly see him. Fikayo, so great to have you on Food for Thought. The way this is going to work is that they're going to have a kind of like a Q&A, and if our audience members want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function ideally, because it's easier for me to see them there. I'll pick your questions up from there. Fikayo, you're here because you started a very cool company called Kugali, and you actually started that while you were at City University, where you studied for an MA in creative writing, and then I think came across all of our City Ventures programs that run there. So you have been kind of through our entrepreneurship programs, I can say, right, in an extracurricular sense. So we've known each other for a few years now, and Kugali is a really interesting company that we don't often get to see actually as a startup, as the type of startup company, because it is an entertainment company, and we don't have many of those at City. So maybe it would be worthwhile if you could tell us a little bit what Kugali actually is and what it does.
Absolutely. Kugali is an entertainment company that focuses on art and animation inspired by various cultures across Africa. Our real vision is to use art and animation to unearth hidden stories that we often see in the media. And what that actually looks like is in two forms. The first form is in publishing. So we publish comic books and graphic novels similar to a Marvel or DC, but we also work in the wider entertainment industry, particularly in the television sector, where we develop ideas and license IP and content and work with streamers and producers to bring forth projects to life as well.
And what is your own role in that? Because you're obviously an entrepreneur, so you're the CEO of Ali, but you do also a little bit more than that, don't you?
Yes, I do. So in addition to my responsibilities as CEO, I'm a storyteller. My whole inspiration behind this was ultimately to create a platform through which I could tell stories that excite me and also excite my readers or my audience. So I'm a script writer. I've written a couple of graphic novels. I'm working on my first TV series at the moment, and I also work with the wider creative team within the company to help guide, foster, and ensure that we're telling the best possible stories that we can.
Okay, so we had a pre-chat earlier, right? And you told me because Fikayo has another name, so we were just talking about that other name. So maybe people know you under that other name. So do you briefly want to say what that is? And
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm more popularly known as Zeke Nelson. It's a pen name that I use is because when I became a writer before I became an entrepreneur, and suddenly I realized I was gaining a lot of traction under that moniker, and so I just decided to roll with it and stick with it.
Exactly. So if you are into graphic novels, which I must admit I'm not, it is not really a genre I know anything about, but Ziki Nelson I think is quite well known. So we were talking about this before, that he has actually fans. It's like it's like I only have students and I have critics, but it's so great to actually have somebody say my fans know me under my pen name, which is amazing. So congratulations on this. By the way, for those of you who have not seen any of this, so this, for example, is, do you want to explain what this is, Fikayo?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the Kugali Anthology. It's a collection of different comics created by different artists and writers across the African continent.
And that was the main inspiration, right, for Kugali, that you wanted. I know a little bit more about your company, right? But maybe it is worthwhile to kind of revisit a little bit the problem that we were having a little bit with the storytelling as it is available predominantly in the Western world. So what gap is Kugali filling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are two sides to thinking about it. In the context of the Western world, I think the need or the problem that we're fulfilling is we've realized that a large percentage of our audience are people, well, really two classes. Number one are people from the African diaspora that are interested in content that more closely represents their culture, or just they feel represents them. So that diversity key to the equation. But similarly as well, we actually just have a lot of normal comic book readers or people who are interested in the type of stories that we create that want something new or different, because what you see in the industry is in a sense a regurgitation of the same thing over and over again. So when you can bring something new to the table, it enriches the genre as a whole. And then the third piece to that as well, which is I think the piece that matters the most, is that I recognize that, I grew up in Nigeria till I was 15, and I recognize that where I come from, there aren't really that many opportunities for people who want to do the types of things that I do. And so therefore, to have a company that gives opportunities to people like that, people like my younger self and people across the continent that want to work as artists or storytellers is a third piece of the problem that we're trying to solve.
So Kugali, the Kugali Anthology basically brings together, so you kind of, in a way, it's almost a vehicle to feature different storytellers, right?
Yes.
And the idea is indeed to tell stories that are inspired by African mythology rather than the typical Western mythology that we tend to be kind of exposed. I don't know, it's like if you look at the whole Marvel universe, right? It's like there is a certain type of cultural elements that are being on that completely miss out basically African mythology. So how do you find the artists that you feature? Like, is there a community that already exists? Is it a community that you have created? It's like, how do you find the talent basically that you want to promote through Kugali?
I bring up this question because as we grow and we try to implement more standard systems, because a lot of the startup work you do is very haphazard, we really thought to ourselves, is there a way for us to systematize our talent recruitment, because it's so messy. For example, random people will reach out to us. One of my co-founders, who's based in Lagos, will go to a bunch of events and he'll go to Comic Cons on the continent as well. So there isn't really one specific way that we find people. People reach out to us on our social media is probably a big one. Face-to-face networking as well has probably been the second biggest area. Yeah, so I'd say those two areas, but we really do search everywhere and do everything that we can.
Right. So it is a mixture of kind of serendipity, you know, kind of like just coming across the right people, people reaching out to you and actually finding other people. I think I mentioned this point of community because obviously you have in a way the creators on the one side and then you have the customers on the other side. If customer is even the right word, right? But people who are your readers. And I think the reason why I mentioned this is because you have been using crowdsourcing or crowdfunding very effectively to get your projects off the ground. So maybe it would be good to hear a little bit more about your experience with crowdfunding. I know you've just closed a very successful crowdfunding round for another project, and it seems like you have really managed to build a certain type of community that is very much behind what you do and wants to see your ideas come to life. So yeah, a little bit of background on these different projects and how you go about them would be really interesting, I think.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll talk about crowdfunding and how we've utilized crowdfunding. So part of what gave me the confidence or belief that this project or this mission was actually possible was the fact that the landscape in terms of media has changed. You know, even this podcast is an example of it, in the sense that today, or back in the day, let's say if this 20 years ago, if I wanted to realize my ambitions, I would need to go to a gatekeeper. I would need to find either a publisher or an agent or some sort of gatekeeper that could connect me to potential readers or potential fans if they were out there. Whereas today, there are so many opportunities to take your message directly to the fans, and crowdfunding is, in my mind, one of the best ways of doing that, because you're able to achieve a number of things. Number one is you're able to present your idea, and you're able to see very quickly whether this is an idea that people are willing to pay for, because the crowdfunding campaign lives and dies by whether or not you reach a funding target that you set. So we've leveraged crowdfunding twice. The first time was about 2 years ago, where we launched our first comic book anthology, the first Kugali Anthology. It went quite well. We raised about just over £25,000, and then we decided to return to crowdfunding again this year to launch the one of my graphic novels, and that went even better this time. We nearly hit about £50,000. So crowdfunding has been a really great way for us to grow our audience, actually validate our idea, and then build our community from that as well.
So when you say and a great way to grow your audience, do you actually acquire new fans through the crowdfunding process, or is it more that you have the fans and you get them engaged through the crowdfunding process? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs who maybe don't have necessarily easy access to funding consider crowdfunding, but it is actually quite hard to be successful at it, right? So I think it's an interesting question, how you can be successful in crowdfunding. Do you require the interest beforehand, or can you really build the interest through your campaign?
So the first point you bring up about how difficult crowdfunding is also platform specific, and also the type of crowdfunding. So we went for rewards-based crowdfunding, where you present the product and then the reader or the user decides, yes, I want this, so I will pledge £20 towards buying this product in the hopes that this crowdfunder is successful. And the biggest of all these platforms is a Kickstarter. Now, there are other platforms, and each platform has its own nuance, but because Kickstarter is the biggest, it is also the most saturated, and therefore to really get any benefit out of Kickstarter, you need to be able to, you need to understand how the algorithm works. And in a nutshell, what you want is to start quite strongly. And how you're able to do that doesn't necessarily matter. So for example, with our first crowdfunder, where we were a much younger company and we didn't have that much of an audience, didn't have the audience that we needed to get us to get the ball rolling. What we needed to do was do a lot of legwork in terms of PR and personally reaching out to people, and really was a relentless chase, because there are ways of essentially predicting how well you can do. You think of, okay, how much traffic am I likely to generate? What's the average conversion rate for this type of project? And then you can come up with a prediction. And generally speaking, you want to be able to hit about 10 to 20% of your goal within the first 24 to 48 hours. So if you can do the maths of how many people I'll need and what the average conversion rate is, then you're able to tap into the algorithm, and then you start trending, because really the real of Kickstarter is tapping into that Kickstarter audience. Kickstarter is the largest rewards-based crowdfunding website, and so there are many people who use Kickstarter as a means to discover new products, and that's the real advantage. Because if you can't do that, you're literally going to have to get all to generate all the traffic yourself, and then the question then becomes, what would be the point? So that's how it works in a nutshell.
Wow, that's really interesting, because you make it very clear that you actually have to plan out your crowdfunding campaign in a lot of detail and really understand how the platform works in order to get those benefits from it. And kind of thinking, I made a mental note that if we ever do a crowdfunding session again, you'll be the first guest that I'm going to invite to explain to our fellow entrepreneurs how to do that best. And basically, I think that's an interesting point between the different campaigns that you've run, because it sounds like the first one you were building the community, you were still building your kind of fan base, whereas I know that in your most recent one, I think you got funded within 10 hours and you're overfunded by 50% or something like that, correct?
Yeah, 500%, but yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. So it's not even, I haven't even checked the last time. So how much money did you raise now overall through crowdfunding in this last round?
So about £48,000.
And you wanted?
I think the original goal was 10,000. So yeah.
Okay, so there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a huge success. So congratulations on that. We have the first question coming in. So apart from crowdfunding, it sounds like you focus on the supply side of the industry. So kind of, it's like you create content based on what, the kind of stories that people want to tell. However, what about the demand side? Do you also create content based on the demand side of the industry? So for instance, what is your target market? Do you actively look to understand what these fans want? Or do you take this approach that I'm the creator, I tell my stories and fans will like it?
What we try to do is actually get the best of both worlds. Because I'm quite rebellious. I might not seem like it, but if someone tells me this is what I want you to do, that becomes the last thing that I want to do. And I feel like maybe this is indicative of a lot of creative people. So I try not to be too prescriptive when I'm working with artists or writers. However, at the same time, you can't just give people a lease to do whatever they want if there is no demand or appetite for it. Because ultimately we're running a business. So what we try to do is we try to, what does the market want? And then what are the options that we have? Because we have a ledger of different writers, all with a ton of projects, we can say, okay, you know what, there's like right now, one of the areas of opportunity that we're looking at is actually in the children's market. So publishing work specifically aimed at children, because that's one of the highest growing segments of the overall graphic novel market. So it's so much that we're telling our writers or artists, hey, you have to write child-friendly content. We're just finding the people who happen to be really passionate about writing child-friendly content and then using them or working with them to take advantage of this opportunity.
Okay, so it is in a way looking at the market, but maybe from a different perspective, which is a bit where are the gaps, but we are still kind of giving complete creative freedom in a way to the creators. I think that is indeed a very different approach than the typical business approach, right? Of looking at what the customer wants and then trying to deliver that. So there's a follow-up question on that, which is going to be fun. What's the hardest thing about working with creatives? And then again, you are one yourself, right? So.
I think there are many. I don't know if there's one hardest thing. I think maybe the biggest challenge is fact that it's much harder to quantify the quality of any given product or idea. You know, if you're building a phone, for example, there's just a bunch of, there's a checklist, you know, does it work? How well does it work? And you can really, really quantify that. Whereas when you're trying to judge the value or potential of a story, and when you're talking with writers thinking about things from both the qualitative side, but also the business side, it's very, very difficult to quantify. And so ultimately, there's always an element of faith that you need to take, in your artists and writers. And if you're very grounded or scientific or someone who likes a lot of predictability, that takes you outside of your comfort zone. So I think I'll stick with that.
And have you made, are you generally good at picking successful creatives, or do you feel that that's something you had to learn, or is it really, you know, does it come natural to you? Is it, like, do you have a methodology, or is it really kind of more of a gut instinct of kind of knowing this is the right thing?
I think what I've realized is that ultimately, because one of the advantages of the type of business that we run is the fact that you can actually target multiple segments simultaneously, because if you know, we all consume stories one way or the other, right? Whether it's films, comics, or whatnot. But think about film, which is maybe one of the most popular forms of storytelling. There are R-rated films, there are fiction films for children, etc., etc. So what I've realized is that not everything is for me, and so because of that unless I feel like I'm within the target market, I don't really tend to go to that sort of instinctual response to a story. I tend to try and think about it a bit more by putting myself in the shoes of the potential target market, right? So with the children's story that we're working on, I'm trying to think, okay, well, would an 8-year-old enjoy this? And obviously, I then get the opinion of people who probably know a bit more about 8-year-old psychology than I do, i.e., parents or 8-year-olds themselves. So that's how. So I think in the beginning, it was a bit more intuitive. But as we've grown and as we've tried to improve, we're trying to take a bit more of a methodical approach to this.
So so that's actually a really good segue to my next question. So from a business perspective, right? Because you said yourself, like, I was a writer before I became an entrepreneur. So what are the biggest lessons that you've learned as somebody who's been trying to turn this creative passion actually into a business? What are the biggest, because your business is an unusual one, right? Because you work with so many freelancers, you have less of a kind of like fixed employee structure, and you work with a larger network. What are the key mistakes maybe that you've made or lessons that you've learned?
I think in fact, funny enough, it actually links me back to the earlier question of what the worst thing about working with creatives are. And actually, one of the things that is just a general mistake that creative people have is we tend to buy our own hype really, really easily. We come up with this really creative idea, you just think like, oh my God, this is amazing. And because it's more creative and less quantifiable, stress testing mechanisms aren't as obvious. So we've had a ton of ideas of, oh, like this is going to be the next big story, or oh, this format is going to be the next big thing. And the thing that has led that decision making has been how excited everybody feels about it, rather than having a clear, more robust framework to actually analyze and test. So I suppose if I was to summarize, the mistake is buying into hype rather than buying into data or facts.
Okay, I'm kind of hoping that possibly your time with us at City Ventures and the Launch Lab might have helped in coming to that realization, because you have really done our entrepreneurship programs, right? I mean, you've spent quite some time with us. What's been actually, it's like if speaking to the other students who are listening to this, what's been helpful about the university's provision when it comes to entrepreneurship services. I know that Alex is on the call, so you need to be careful with what you say.
Right, time to wax lyrical. But on a more serious note, I think that there's quite an exhaustive list that comes to my mind, but I think the most important things I want to mention is, particularly in the early days where we were a much smaller team, before it was literally just myself and my co-founder over in Lagos. And so, particularly like when you're doing something creative, there's a danger of spending too much time in your own head. But when you're plugged into a community of people who are objective, so, you know, you mentioned Alex. If I tell Alex about an idea, I mean, obviously Alex and I get along, but, you know, he cares more about giving me his honest feedback than my feelings. And so just being put into a community of people who will actually just tell you what they honestly think about your ideas pulls you out of your head and allows you, because ultimately to create a business, you need to be able to interact with the real world. You can't just interact with your own head. So that would be the first thing that I would mention. Second thing would just be the solidarity. So again, particularly if there are students listening, you're probably going to start this quite small. It might be yourself and a co-founder, but they're not going to be many of you. And so being in a community of other like-minded people who are going through a similar journey helps create a lot of solidarity for you, because it's a very difficult journey to take entrepreneurship, a lot of self-doubt and whatnot. And so community really helps. And then apart from that, just more specifically, I guess the mentorship or the guide, because you don't have all the skills, you can't afford all the skills. So just having opportunities to talk to people who are knowledgeable. I think for me, I benefited a lot from a lot of the legal seminars that they had. But there are other seminars and talks and mentors that also helped as well.
Thank you. And I think what's really nice is that almost all of the entrepreneurs we've had on here have made the point that it is important to talk about your ideas and to talk about, like, really solicit this feedback. This was a bit your first point, because sometimes people believe that you should keep your ideas secret. You could kind of like, we want to protect them, etc. But really the advice consistently is don't do that. Talk about it, get feedback. Because that always helps to kind of think things through and not do this all on your own. So I think that's really nice to see that come back over and over again from everyone. I have actually there are a couple of people asking more or less the same question. And it's a little bit about what next for Kugali and what the role of technology is and the digital stuff, for example, AR, etc. In your industry. So here's one question which asks, so can you tell us what's next? Is there any particular area you're focusing on when it comes to, for example, AR and the digital stuff, whatever that is? You probably know what is meant with that. And a similar question is asking whether technology will influence how we tell stories again about AR and VR. So clearly you're working on something there. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more, but briefly, because we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah, sure. No worries. I'll give the cliff notes. But we're working with Snapchat at the moment. We have a partnership with them, and Snap is an AR platform. So we're developing a lot of AR content for them. So this is specifically in the realm of augmented reality. Well, because we've built that internal capability as well, we're finding that there's a lot of interest in using AR for just advertising. So we've worked with a number of foundations and brands to create AR filters and products that help promote their brands. So this is building the B2B side of Kugali that will hopefully make enough money for us to indulge our creatives a bit more than we might normally be able to. So that's one thing. That's, I think, one of the biggest aspects where we see things going from a technological point of view. And then on the B2C side, we're launching an app and redesigning our website. So we're really just trying to focus on the user experience side of things, because nobody has quite yet fully cracked that seamless comic book reading experience. The vast majority of people still want it physical, but because we're COVID times, that's not as easy to do. So we're trying to figure out ways we can use technology to deal with that. And then finally working with streaming, so creating more content for streaming platforms as well. Those are the three big things on our horizon.
Those are a lot of big things, and shockingly, it's like I told you, this half hour always goes by like nothing. But so one of the big news is that there's going to be an announcement, I think you said in December, that
Oh,
you
yeah.
are actually producing a TV series for a large streaming network. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So I have written and will be going on to direct a TV series for a large streaming network. I am sworn to silence at this particular moment, but they have assured me that they are going to make an official announcement on the 19th of December. So so people will know that this is not an imaginary thing. It's actually happening.
That is fantastic. That's great news. Congratulations on that. And yeah, unfortunately, there's still a couple of questions we didn't get around to. But if you want to know more about Kugali, just go on their website, follow them on social media. And of course, when the big announcement comes, we will make sure that it's all over the place. We're very happy to amplify your message. And we are always extremely proud to welcome back our alumni who are doing these great things in the world. So this was really fun, Fikayo. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for listening, and hope to see you soon again. Take care.
Brilliant. Enjoy your day.
Bye.
Bye.